understanding currency and how they work. Ke tlhaloganya gore pula e go godimo ga madi a South Africa.
Go a ka nna le dila pula le santse le tsetsepetse mo Southern Africa.
Ha re ya ko dollareng re kwa tlase mme ga ya re gatella go le kalo. Pula ya ikgaratlhela thata e seng re gatelwa go le kalo-kalo.
Ga o le mo Botswana wa ko South Africa o bo heta o convertela le dila pula to rands wa go itlhela ile gore wena o tswa mo Botswana wa South Africa o na le dipoelo tse di botoka le dila gago la go tla le botoka madi a teng a go tla a oketsegile.
Ha o tswa South Africa o tla Botswana gora gore o tlo go spenda thata ka gore madi a gago a kwa tlase.
So you're preparing to travel across the border into South Africa. One of the things you do to prepare for said travel is check how much the pula is to the South African rand or the ZAR. You find out that one pula gives 1 rand 30 cents. How is all of this determined, you ask? Well, the pula is fixed to a basket of foreign currencies, namely the special drawing rights or SDR and the South African rand, the ZAR. The SDR comprises the US dollar, the British pound, the euro, Japanese yen and the Chinese renminbi. Currently, the pula basket weighs at 45% South African rand or ZAR and 55% SDR, and also the downward rate of crawl of 1.51% per annum during 2024 in view of the favorable inflation differentials in favor of Botswana. Still, what does this all mean? And how does it determine how much foreign currency I get from what I have in pula when traveling or transacting? We're with Gomolemo Basele, Economist at First National Bank of Botswana, to explain to us how exactly currencies work. Gomolemo, thank you so much for coming on First Issues and affording us your time. We're here to talk about currencies, right? But let us talk about them. What are they and what determines the exchange rate between a domestic and foreign currency?
Currencies essentially provide a means of exchange for goods and services between countries and also domestically through money that's circulated through the economy. So as for what determines the value of one currency against another, I think those are, in a simplistic way, demand and supply issues. So depending on whether another nation wants to procure goods and services from another nation, country B, that will drive the demand for that currency, and depending on the supply that's available would then affect the value of that particular currency.
In our introduction of this segment, I mentioned that currently the pula basket is weighed at 45% South African rand and 55% SDR, and also a downward rate of crawl of 1.5% per annum during 2024 in view of the favorable inflation differentials in favor of Botswana. So in simpler terms, what does this mean?
So as you've already mentioned, the pula is pegged to a basket of currencies, being the ZAR at 45%, as well as the SDR, which is the IMF's unit of account. So the SDR contains essentially a basket of other currencies, which include the dollar, the pound, the euro, Japanese yen, and the Chinese renminbi. Over and above this, there's a rate of crawl that's applied to the pula basket. So currently it stands at negative 1.51%. And what that essentially means is that we'd expect the pula to depreciate by 1.51% over the course of the year. In our view, this has very little bearing in terms of how we forecast the pula's value over the course of the year. Instead, as you already mentioned, it's put into place to try and ensure that Botswana's inflation differentials with its trading partners are kept to a minimum. So Botswana's trading partners essentially being represented by those two major currencies that have that have been included in the peg. So from an export standpoint, the SDR countries represent where our diamonds essentially end up. So the main or the philosophy behind choosing or constructing the peg the way it is now was to reflect how Botswana trades with external parties. Basically, what this means is that the value of the pula is determined, or the value of the pula against hard currencies such as the dollar is determined by the performance of the currencies included within the peg. So the pula's value is not determined by basic supply and demand issues or determined on a trade-weighted basis. It's determined by the performance of the currencies included in the peg. And the implication of this is that economic events, as well as political events that play out in Botswana, have very little bearing in the value of the pula, which is different from how we see things playing out in the likes of South Africa.
Let us speak more on South Africa and Botswana. Why was Botswana's currency pegged against the ZAR as opposed to other stronger currencies on the continent?
The major motivation has to do with our trade patterns. So the ZAR in Africa is the country that we trade the most with. So it was essential to have it within our basket of currencies to ensure some level of stability when it comes to trade with South Africa. But the downside of this, obviously, as I previously mentioned, is that because we have these currencies within our basket, our political as well as economic events have very little bearing in terms of the value of our currency. So what happens instead is that as economic as well as political events play out in South Africa, you tend to see some volatility in the pula against major crosses such as the dollar. But and then on the upside, because we have the SDR also included within our basket, it introduces a certain level of stability compared to where you'd see the ZAR performing against hard currencies such as the dollar. So the ZAR's value almost determines the pula's value against major crosses, but and then it's almost tapered off by the fact that we have another element that counterweighs it essentially.
What could be the benefit, or what is the actual benefit for the everyday Motswana about this whole entire arrangement besides the obvious?
So this arrangement essentially tries to ensure that goods and services produced locally are competitive on an international level. So seeing the rate of growth, for example, being set to depreciate, firstly, it suggests that inflation domestically is likely to overshoot that of our trading partners. So price growth domestically is likely to overshoot price growth within our trading partners combined. And what that would mean is that as an exporter, your goods would be less competitive due to the fact that they're more expensive for importers on the other side. So the idea behind depreciating it is to try and make it more competitive by reducing the overall price that importers of our exports would pay.